Awesome. Well, welcome. If you're just joining us, you're in the right place. We're going to have a great conversation today about borderland wildlife corridors, and we're going to cover a lot of ground today. I'm Emily Burns. I'm the program director with Sky Island Alliance, and I'm going to be speaking first, and then I'm going to be passing it off to Aaron. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Mrotek. I am the Patagonia-Sonoita Creek Preserve Manager, and I'll be talking to you guys a little bit about one of the studies that we're doing to improve wildlife corridors in the Patagonia-Sonoita Creek area. So, looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Aaron. And then after Aaron, my colleague Bryan's gonna talk. Bryon, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bryon Lichtenhan. I'm the Stewardship Manager for Skyland Alliance, and I'll be addressing some of our other ongoing projects throughout this corridor and other volunteer opportunities that we have coming up.
Wonderful, thanks. All right, next slide, please. We're going to be talking about an amazing section of the landscape in southeastern Arizona that is, for the moment, very well connected to northern Sonora. The land that we are talking about on both sides of the border, this is indigenous land, this is native land. And we're going to be specifically talking about lands that are the ancestral homeland for the Tanatham, Chiricahua, Apache, and other indigenous peoples. Next slide. All right, we're going to talk through 4 different topics today. First, I'm going to cover an overview of the wildlife corridor of interest today. We're going to be talking about the connection between 3 sky islands, the Huachuca Mountains, the Patagonia Mountains, and the Santa Rita Mountains, south and southeast of Tucson, Arizona. Then I'm going to address what is now an imminent threat of border wall that's coming to the San Rafael Valley that is between the Huachuca and Patagonia Mountains. Then Aaron is going to talk about their Sonoita Creek Wildlife Corridor Improvement Projects, and that's a place where you can get involved and be a volunteer. And then Bryon is going to share other wildlife and spring projects that we have going on within the corridor as well at Sky Island Alliance, and these are all great volunteer opportunities. As we're talking, you may certainly have questions. We want to save as much time as we can for questions at the end, but please feel free to put them into the chat as they occur to you. If we can, when the speakers aren't talking, we will provide answers in the chat directly, and then we'll discuss big questions at the end. All right. Well, here's a map from Borderlands Restoration Network that shows the connection and one of the major wildlife corridors that we see in this area. So to orient you, this is south of Tucson. In the upper left-hand corner, those are the Santa Rita Mountains. And as we move to the bottom right corner, you're getting into where the Huachuca Mountains are. So we've got the complex of actually 4 different sky islands that are visible here. We've got the Santa Ritas at the top left. If you were to go directly to the upper right-hand corner, you'd be in the Whetstone Mountains near Benson. Dropping south, again, that's the Huachuca Mountains. And then if you go west to the bottom left corner of the map, those are the Patagonia Mountains. There are many places that are really wonderful wildlife corridors. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service defines a wildlife corridor as undeveloped land that connects 2 habitats. So on this larger scale, we do have corridors between the Sky Islands, and it's a goal of both the Nature Conservancy and Sky Island Alliance to make sure that those corridors stay functional for wildlife on the move. And then at a smaller scale, there are smaller patches of habitat that have connectivity. And when we think about protecting connectivity, we're thinking about making sure that animals can truly move across that landscape. They're able to access these different habitats unobstructed, reducing threats to animals on the move between the habitats. And we're also thinking about the resources that these animals need to survive and to thrive within the corridor and their core habitats. That's simple things like food, native plants and native animal species, water, often springs, and the Santa Cruz River goes through this area. They need refuge, they need safe places, and they're looking for mates. So those are all things that we can support when we're doing habitat protection and habitat conservation work. Next slide. Another wildlife corridor that we won't specifically focus on today, but of course you're all familiar with the fact that we had this beautiful male jaguar come into Arizona in 2023. This jaguar showed up on multiple cameras, first in the Huachuca Mountains after crossing the U.S. Mexico border from Sonora, showed up in the Whetstone Mountains in May. So just about 2 years ago, we photographed this beautiful animal in the Whetstone Mountains. And then later in the fall of 2023, it was seen again in the Whetstone Mountains and went back to the Huachuca Mountains. So this is an animal that sort of exemplifies the need for a wildlife corridor. If we are successful in providing safe passage for an animal like a jaguar across our landscape, between our Sky Islands, between Arizona and Sonora, we are achieving really wonderful conservation for not just jaguar, but a whole range of different species. Next slide. The challenge with this corridor as a whole is that for the moment, it is very passable to a multitude of the large-bodied terrestrial animal species that we have in this region. That means that we only have the U.S. Mexico border delineated by cattle fencing. And what you're seeing in this picture on the south side of the road, that's called vehicle barrier. So this was installed after 2008. And this vehicle barrier is truly a barrier. It's not the easiest thing for deer or pronghorn to move through, but they can. And the challenge that we have is during the first Trump administration, federal laws and statutes were waived along many sections of the border, including the whole San Rafael Valley. So what that means is that it's a very simple decision for the government to decide to build different border infrastructure. And the plan is from Border Patrol is to build at least 25 miles of border wall across the San Rafael Valley. We don't know exactly when construction will start. It hasn't started yet. And as of last week, we understood that there was not a contractor actually selected yet for this work. But we know that the wall will be finished over the Huachuca Mountains and then across the valley. We understand that the funding for this is likely coming from congressionally appropriated funds from 2020 and 2021. Those funds cannot be used to build wall over the Patagonia Mountains. So for the moment, we don't think that there's any plans to build in the Patagonia Mountains. All of this, unfortunately, is really subject to change. And there's $46.5 billion of border wall construction funding in the current Homeland Security bill. So there's a very real possibility that if that budget passes, there will be more than enough funding to completely finish the wall in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. It's not enough to complete it in Texas. So there is that. Okay, next slide. Across the San Rafael Valley and including the Huachuca Mountains and the Patagonia Mountains is an area that Sky Island Alliance knows really well. In 2020, when the first threat of border wall construction was really picking up pace during the last Trump administration, we started our border wildlife study. We are now celebrating 5 years of this amazing project and all of the tremendous species that call this landscape home. One of the main things to understand about this location is that this is a place for animals. Based on our camera detections of what we're photographing on about 70 cameras through this area, is that wildlife outnumber people here 127 to 1. You are more likely to see deer than another human when you're down there on the landscape. And I think for anyone who's visited it, you really get that sense. It's a very large, expansive landscape. It's very quiet. It's known for its dark skies. There's really a rural lifestyle for the community that lives around the Santa Cruz River. And it's been like this for many generations. So we have a lot to lose. There are a lot of important cultural sites. There are a lot of animals that will be dramatically affected by the construction of the border wall. Next slide. So here's a picture of the Santa Cruz River in the center of the San Rafael Valley. This really is the heart of the valley, and it's amazing that the headwaters are here. Here's a picture of it during the winter. There's always water that flows across the border into Sonora. So the river starts in Arizona, it flows into Sonora, and then comes back into Arizona closer to Nogales. There's two crossings. Right now, both crossings are slated to have border construction. One of our biggest calls to action is to not have the border wall actually dam the Santa Cruz River. And here are some images from further east along the border. Deer certainly cannot pass through the border wall. So we know for black bear, mule deer, white-tailed deer, and pronghorn and Gould's turkey, they're going to be completely stopped by the border wall if it goes in. There is a ray of hope. The small wildlife openings, if you can see just behind this hind leg of this white-tailed deer, this small passage that's 8 inches by 11 inches actually works for some species. And so the javelina, the cute javelina lined up in a traffic jam in the photo in the top left corner are actually using these small wildlife passages. So while all species combined, the border wall reduces wildlife crossing by 86%. When we have these small wildlife openings, it increases the crossing rates for javelina, coyote, bobcat, and mountain lion by 16 times. So this is a really important feature and one of the things we would like to see Border Patrol install frequently when the border wall comes across the valley. Okay, next slide. So lastly, I'm going to wrap up by saying it's hard to know what we all can do in face of this wall coming across the heart of this wildlife corridor. It's certainly devastating. We're going to be releasing within the next few days a rapid report that describes some of the statistics that I've shared with you today about the important values across the greater San Rafael Valley and explain what we think is so important to influence if there's any opportunity to do that. So we want to avoid harm to cultural and archaeological sites. We want to leave as many passages open for wildlife movement across the valley as possible, especially at the Santa Cruz River. Installing the small wildlife passages is key. We need to avoid border lighting. Illuminating lights in one of these very dark areas will have sky glow impacts for many miles and affecting many borderland communities. And then during the construction process itself, we would really like to see little to no groundwater pumping to make the cement of the border wall and to keep dust down during construction. We've seen this all happen already, so we know there's a real opportunity to drain our groundwater in the San Rafael from pumping. That's something that can be avoided. And then to be mitigating the habitat destruction and investing in local restoration projects that can make this habitat as sustainable as possible for these species that will be more stressed by the border wall. All right, well, I'm going to leave it there and we're going to switch to a topic where there is a chance to really build in a positive outcome for wildlife further north in the corridor. So take it away, Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Emily, not only for that great overview of wildlife corridors, but for all your work and all the work that Island Alliance does along the borderland area. Really, really important for the larger ecology of these areas. Again, everyone, my name is Aaron Mrotek. I'm the Patagonia-Sonoita Creek Preserve Manager with the Nature Conservancy. I've been with the Nature Conservancy for 6.5 years now. The majority of my career with the Conservancy has been in Aravaipa Canyon, where I've actually met a number of you guys who are here on this call, working on the Vinca project in Aravaipa. So it's good to see a bunch of you guys here. Um, I've since moved over to Patagonia, where I manage this gorgeous swath of land, 873 acres, here in the Sonoita Creek watershed. This place is really important for a number of reasons. One, we sit in the middle of this really important wildlife corridor that we're going to go into a little bit more detail about. The preserve also sits on the headwaters of Sonoita Creek. We see the water emerge from the ground here on the preserve and then flow about another 10 miles downstream until it reaches Patagonia Lake, which I'm sure a number of you guys have had the opportunity to visit. Our preserve is open to the public. We have trail systems that are very well maintained. There's a number of people who come here, especially for the avian biodiversity that we see here on the preserve. Over 300 species of birds have been sighted on Patagonia-Sonoita Creek Preserve since eBird has been a thing. Um, but in addition to that, one of the things that makes this place really, really special is the variety of habitat types that we have here. I think about this preserve in 5 distinct ecosystem types, depending on where you're at in the preserve, which really gives rise to just an incredible amount of vegetative biodiversity that really is the base of our ecosystem here that supports all the birds, animals, insects, lizards, snakes that call this place home. So, in my role here, I mostly focus on habitat restoration, largely around invasive species removal and revegetating with native biodiversity. I'm very involved with stream restoration, hydro monitoring, as we're seeing unprecedented changes within the watershed that we'll talk about later in my section. Um, either participate or lead in a number of watershed scale collaborative projects with other environmental nonprofits that are local to the Patagonia area. We're involved in fire mitigation work to protect the preserve, but not only the preserve, but also the town of Patagonia. And then very heavily involved in volunteer engagement and then visitor engagement here on the preserve. I very specifically chose these two photos that you're seeing here on the slideshow. This was me back in about 2016, 2017, back when I was an intern for Sky Island Alliance. I have a very close connection to this wonderful organization that you guys are all a part of. They provided me what became a large part of my base to develop my career that I pursued here in Southern Arizona. So just a little glimpse of the past. Bryon actually was the one who took these photos of us setting some of the very first cameras that Sky Island deployed along the Borderlands region. So there it is in the flesh, everyone. So we'll talk just a little bit more about the Sonoita Creek watershed. We're going to kind of zoom out from the preserve, look a little bit at the larger watershed, and just to give it a little definition, a watershed is kind of any area where, like, if you can imagine a drop of rain, a drop of rain falling in a given area, it's the size of the area where if that drop of rain dropped in any spot within this given area, it would flow down to a common point. Okay. So here in the Sonoita Creek watershed, kind of the bottom drainage of our watershed is Sonoita Creek. Sonoita Creek does drain into the Santa Cruz River if it made it there overground. Again, the creek itself is dammed at Patagonia Lake, which kind of provides a barrier to the full flow of the creek. But a certain amount of that does flow over the dam into the Sonoita Creek state natural area. And then a certain amount of that water does flow further underground and does make it to the Santa Cruz River, but there's not a perennial flow across that area. Like I said, there's about 10 to 12 miles of perennial water along the Sonoita Creek drainage. Our elevation ranges go from about 3,700 feet at the confluence of Sonoita Creek and the Santa Cruz River, all the way up to 9,400 plus feet at the top of Mount Wrightson in the Santa Rita mountain range. Big draws to this area, as I've already mentioned, is the avian biodiversity. Just at Patagonia Sonoita Creek Preserve alone, over 300 species of birds have been sighted here. It's a great destination for ecotourism. I mentioned we have this trail system here on the preserve, but there's trails including the Arizona Trail that span the watershed. There's a big winery industry just up at the top of our watershed in Sonoita that contributes to the ecotourism area. And then also there's a really big conservation community here in particular in Patagonia. There's a number of environmental nonprofits that all collaborate on a number of different projects. So I represent the Nature Conservancy down here. We also have Borderlands Restoration, who operates out of Patagonia. Sky Island Alliance participates in their Spring Seekers project, Photo Fauna, and a number of other projects. Tucson Bird Alliance these days also has a heavy footprint in the area with their Patton Center for Hummingbirds and a lot of the restoration work that I collaborate with them on. And then finally, Friends of Sonoita Creek is a great presence supporting all of those groups. Going to zoom back out a little bit. This is a map that you've already seen from Emily here. Kind of looking at the broader landscape here. So this kind of represents a big chunk of southeastern Arizona. Again, we kind of talked about wildlife corridors and their definition. So it's a continuous swath of land expected to be the best route for one or more focal species to travel from a potential population core in one wildlife block to another population core in another wildland block. So and we define wildland blocks down in this region. Generally, they're defined by our Sky Island Mountains. So the Sierra, the Huachuca Mountain Range would be considered a wildlife block. The Patagonia Mountain Range would be considered a wildlife block. The Santa Rita Mountain Range in this image would also be considered a wildlife block. So these are generally places where there's not a lot of development. There's good access to unfragmented habitat. Unfragmented meaning, not big highways moving through these areas, not significant fencing or the development. There's relatively good access to water. So this area that you're seeing here that's kind of marked out by the little cat tracks that you see moving across the area. This is an area that's been identified by a number of different studies, not only through modeling efforts, but on the ground research. Things like what Sky Island Alliance is doing with their photofauna project and their Borderland wildlife study to like actually document the existence of animals using these key habitat zones and crossing through these areas. One thing that makes this area in particular so special is when we think about Sky Islands, we oftentimes think about these grand mountain ranges jutting out from the Sonoran Desert, where down in the desert you have this really low elevation, hot, relatively inhospitable climate to a lot of our kind of upland species. Well, in our wildlife corridor through this area, we don't actually get down to that really low Sonoran Desert area. The track that you're seeing moving through there moves across an area that we call the Canelo Hills. So it's a raised area anywhere from between 4,000 and 6,000 feet that really connects the Huachuca Mountain Range to the Santa Rita Mountain Range. What I'm going to be talking about a little bit more is if you look at there's a kind of a blue outline between the towns of Patagonia and Sonoita. So within the larger wildlife corridor that exists there, the blue outlined area we call the Sonoita Creek Wildlife Corridor. And really what it is, it's just a section, a fragment of the much larger piece. Okay. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in my portion of the talk here. So we're going to zoom back down. I understand from listening to Emily that the slides load just slow, like 5 seconds, 10 seconds slower. So I imagine by now you're seeing a bit more zoomed in version of this Sonoita Creek Wildlife Corridor. And to orient yourselves a little bit, if you look kind of in kind of the upper right here, you can see the town of Sonoita listed. And then kind of more toward the center, lower left there, you can see Patagonia. Between those two spots, you see an outline. That's Sonoita Creek right there. That's the bottom of our watershed that moves through there. But what you're also seeing kind of moving from the lower left to the upper right is kind of a black outlined area. um, and with the letters kind of in these bigger blobs, A, B, and C. So what this map is actually showing, this is the result of some modeling that was done in 2008 by Paul Byer at Northern Arizona University. He's a landscape ecologist. He sought to understand, he did a study across Arizona looking at these places called missing wildlife linkages. Where are there places that we haven't really fully documented or recognized the value of these open swaths of area that are unfragmented that can really serve as intact wildlife corridors. And in our area here in the Sonoita Creek wildlife corridor, he identified, based on his modeling, three key areas where we could expect to see the best potential for wildlife corridors. Um, each of these blocks, so the way that let me back up. The way that the modeling worked is you have a number of different mapping layers that represent different data sets. So one data set might represent uh, any point on a map, what is your distance to water? So that's like a layer, or like what is your distance to development or to housing, or where are the fragmented pieces in the landscape? For instance, highways or mines or fencing that's impermeable, and you're able to combine these layers to kind of create these heat maps that can kind of illustrate geospatially where wildlife corridors could exist. Okay. So, based on this mapping, based on this study that Paul Byer did, we know that based on habitat analyses, we have a really, really important wildlife corridor that moves through the Sonoita Creek watershed. Beyond that, we know that just through observation. If you like Emily was mentioning, when you come out to these landscapes, you're moving through these areas where you're definitely going to see more deer than humans. Um, these areas are very natural. There's not a lot of development. There's great access to water between the springs that we have here, some of the smaller tributaries to Sonoita Creek that have perennial water, Sonoita Creek itself. This is great habitat out here. And having lived down in this area for 2.5 years, I feel blessed to have seen so much wildlife through here. And it's one of the things that motivates me to want to protect it. So down in this area, we do have threats to our Sonoita Creek Wildlife Corridor, and there's a number of threats. There's always various housing developments being proposed, or other things that are happening, but we really have two main threats. And those two main threats are Highway 82 and South 32's Hermosa Mine, which is currently being developed and ramping up in the Patagonia Mountains. So Highway 82, for the purposes of our study area, moves from Sonoita in the north down to Nogales, Arizona. Um, and it more or less follows Sonoita Creek right down at the bottom of the drainage that is the Sonoita Creek watershed. And so you can imagine that highway bisecting not only the watershed, but all three of those key linkages that we saw in the Sonoita Creek wildlife corridor poses a threat to animals that are trying to move from one key habitat type to another safely. In addition to that, like I mentioned, the Hermosa mine, which has been ramping up for about the last 5 years, is situated right in the heart of the Patagonia Mountains. And we talked about those wildlife blocks as being kind of the key habitat, the key homes for many of the species that we aim to protect here. Sitting that mine right in the middle of that key habitat is going to be destructive. It's going to be disruptive at the very least. Um, you're seeing an aerial image that was taken sometime last year. Been some additional developments on that mine, some hoisting buildings that have been put in addition to what you're seeing here. But what we can expect to see from here is there's going to be a lot more light in the middle of the Patagonia Mountains where there never once was. But maybe just as important as all that is we're going to see a huge increase in traffic, not only on Highway 82 as trucks up to approximately 90 to 100 per day are moving ore material in and out of the mine site, but also through the Patagonia Mountains up a road called Harshaw Road that gives them access to this mine site. The issue with that for us is that in that key habitat, having all that disturbance is likely to upset the existing wildlife corridor and where animals find safe haven in their natural habitat. So this mine is likely to push wildlife corridors out of what is historically natural and is likely to push animals away from their core habitat. When that happens, we can expect to see animals using crossing Highway 82 differently than we have in the past. And so considering these threats that we have to the wildlife corridor, one of the things that I started thinking about here in my position was how can we mitigate some of the impacts of the mine? How can we mitigate some of the impacts of the increased traffic on Highway 82? And um, in about the last decade, there's been a lot of work across the West, but in particularly in Europe, around creating safe wildlife crossings in along transportation infrastructure. So that looks like putting in wildlife overpasses, developing wildlife underpasses like you see here in this picture. And really what that does is it obviously improves highway safety for travelers that are using this area, but it also is going to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, making the area safer for the wildlife. And ultimately, it'll mitigate impacts on the wildlife corridor. So I'm starting to think about these things, and as I'm driving through Highway 82, I'm seeing roadkill all over the place. Certain seasons you see more than others. Right now, we seem to be ramping up into kind of a denser roadkill sighting period. Um, and like I'm noticing these things, I'm like, darn, what's something that we can do? This is like one of the most important wildlife corridors that we have in Arizona, and particularly in southern Arizona. What can we do to start protecting this? And so I started reaching out to some of my colleagues and some of my partners across southern Arizona, and we got connected with an organization that's based out of Tucson, the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection, who was instrumental in developing a wildlife overpass that exists north of Tucson. So if you've driven out on Oracle Road, driven north out toward Catalina on Highway 77 there, you may or maybe may not have noticed a big old bridge that doesn't really have a road on it. That is the wildlife crossing that the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection was able to um, drive through to a successful finish. So I developed a field trip out there and invited colleagues from the Nature Conservancy as well as from Borderlands Restoration who've shown to have strong interest in participating in this project. And the purpose of this field trip was really fivefold. One was to create connections, not only between our group and the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection, but also start to network across with Borderlands restoration professionals. We also wanted to go and see a successful project driven by a conservation nonprofit. We met some individuals from the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection out there and spent 2.5 hours or so just peppering them with questions about, what made this project feasible, like what sort of permitting happened, what sort of design considerations. We were all across the board, just taking notes, taking notes, taking notes. But also a big part of my goal here was to establish project buy-in. Like I felt pretty committed to this project, but I wanted to get TNC behind an effort of this scale. And also get Borderlands Restoration to see, that, by participating, this isn't a losing effort. This is something that we could actually, between our two organizations, really drive home here in the Patagonia region. Again, we were asking questions, learning about the process that they went through. So we were really starting to begin the learning processes of developing of developing infrastructure improvement projects. And then also understanding challenges and opportunities. That was a big part of our visit there. So, following that field trip, I was able to organize a really great core group of members that mostly consist of folks from the Nature Conservancy and Borderlands Restoration, but we also have another independent wildlife biologist on our team. But what I really love about this team is we have a great mix of science and kind of institutional know-how here. So within this team, we divided into two sub-working groups. One that would be focused more on the science aspects of this project, and one that would be kind of working with some of our governmental entities, including Arizona Game and Fish, Arizona Department of Transportation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Santa Cruz County, and others to really start putting the pieces together and establish the relationships to move this project forward. We've got an excellent team here. So from this team, we kind of developed a number of kind of strategic priorities of how do we get from the science to actually implementing uh, um, some sort of highway infrastructure improvements. Okay, and you'll notice that I'm gonna say highway overpass here and there. I'll say underpass, but really what I mean to say is we're looking to develop uh, transportation infrastructure improvements. We by doing this study, we plan to follow the data. If the data shows that the best improvements and the best opportunities are done by putting in wildlife overpasses and underpasses, which are big dollar items, then we will try to pursue those projects. But if we can just retrofit existing infrastructure or adjust fencing to make it more friendly for passage in safer areas or put up additional signage, we will do that. We're interested in doing whatever it takes to improve the safety of wildlife crossing Highway 82. So some of the areas that we're looking at pursuing to essentially create a data set, create a story that will present to Arizona Department of Transportation are the list that you see here. And really that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a story. We're trying to create a package for Arizona Department of Transportation that really shows the need for infrastructure improvements. So things like that are going to include roadkill surveys, which we're going to go into in a little bit more detail shortly. We'll deploy wildlife cameras in kind of key areas. Key areas kind of mean like areas where we would assume to see some wildlife movement across Highway 82. So drainages that reach to Highway 82, underpasses, culverts, kind of larger swaths of land that connect some of our protected areas to Highway 82, things like that. I mentioned the 2008 modeling on the Sonoita Creek Wildlife Corridor. That will also be a huge part of the package that we present. ADOT requests, so Freedom of Information Act requests. These are what we're looking for out of that is trying to get ADOT's records for when they have documented instances of vehicle wildlife collisions to help bolster our data. We're also working with Arizona Game and Fish right now on potentially getting radio collars on a number of our charismatic megafauna. So we're looking at black bears, mountain lions, animals of that nature. We'll also be conducting existing infrastructure surveys. So actually going down Highway 82 through our survey reach, actually getting data on like the size of culverts, how blocked are they, what sort of fencing is around those areas, things like that. We'll be doing land ownership mapping, A lot of that work is already done. We just need to compile it, add it to our kind of story package. And then finally, we'll be looking at a breadth of other published scientific literature about wildlife movement and wildlife ecology that has been done in the Sonoita Creek watershed in the past, whether it be done by Arizona Game and Fish or some of our academic partners like University of Arizona, Arizona State University, and Northern Arizona University. So that's what's all going to go into the package that we ultimately deliver to Arizona Department of Transportation. But what I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit more about now is our roadkill study, which is one of the components that we're starting to get off the ground currently. So our roadkill study, you can see the map off to the right there. Our survey reach is essentially going to go from Sonoita, so that's our northern dot up there. That's Sonoita, the crossroads of Highway 83 and Highway 82. It's going to follow Highway 82 down through Patagonia. That's where you're kind of seeing the 26-minute drive, 23.3-mile marker there. It's right in that area. That's Patagonia. It's going to continue south of Patagonia to the Nogales Airport. Okay. That area, if you kind of look more broadly at the map there, to the south, you can very, very easily see the Patagonia Mountains in that darker green color. There's a label on that Harshaw for the old town site of Harshaw there. So that's the Patagonia Mountains. And then to the north up there, where you see the Mount Wrightson, the Mount Wrightson icon, those are the Santa Rita Mountains. So this survey reach perfectly kind of covers all of the different corridor reaches that animals might go directly from habitat type to habitat type. Directly south there of Sonoita, so again, looking at the the northern upper right side of the blue line there, directly south of there, you see another kind of darker area on the map. Those are the Canelo Hills there. So this survey reach also kind of covers that Canelo Hills to the Santa Rita wildlife corridor there. This reach is 23.3 miles. So it does a great job of covering those A, B, and C wildlife corridors that I presented on my second or third slide there. We're really excited about the focused area that we've chosen to really hone in on the modeled wildlife corridor that I presented earlier. So just reading directly off the slide. The goal of our roadkill study is to determine and document where, when, and why wildlife crosses or uses Highway 82, to use the acquired data to determine if there are hotspots for wildlife crossings and vehicle collisions, and to gain science-driven insights that can inform wildlife conservation, land managers, and transportation authorities' management and mitigation strategies. So that's ultimately our goal. We're not I would love to see some really awesome wildlife overpasses through this area, and I think that can and should be a goal, but we'll only go there if the data shows it, and I really want to illustrate that in our objective statement here. So let's talk a little bit more about the roadkill study. We plan on doing this roadkill study for 2 years minimum. In developing the protocols for this study, we interviewed a number of other organizations and academic researchers around how to best approach the data set that we're interested in getting. And across the board, 2-year minimum was recommended. So we worked again with Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection, Wildlands Network, and then a couple of researchers out of Arizona State University to get that. This project will be citizen science driven. We will be working with volunteers to conduct these roadkill studies. There will be a super heavy emphasis on surveyor safety. Data collection can be done with paper data sheets like you see in the screenshot to the right there, but we're also developing an app, a GIS app, where surveyors can enter data directly into the app and it gets uploaded into our cloud database to reduce some administrative steps on our end. And just to give you guys an idea of what we're trying, like the frequency of surveying, we're trying to get one done per week minimum. Right now, currently, I've got a volunteer group established that's a little less than a dozen people. We have not begun yet. We'll be looking to do a volunteer training on May 19th, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But with a dozen folks, and if anyone else is interested from this group and wants to join our efforts, we would welcome you with open arms. If we can do more than one survey per week, that's better. The more data, the better. The more information that we can get into here, the more fine-grained we can provide data to Arizona Department of Transportation. So surveys will be done driving in a vehicle along the survey reach, and they'll be done with two surveyors, one person who will be completely focused on driving, and one person who will be an observer. Again, we're kind of what the aim is to have happen is, we want the whole survey reach done, but if we get enough volunteers, we can start dividing that 23-mile stretch into two separate sections and reduce any ask on any individual volunteer. But the idea would be that when doing a certain segment of the total survey reach, you would drive both directions, once up and once down, focusing on your right-hand side of the vehicles, looking for roadkill, not only in the road, but also off to the public right-of-way as well, as we know that animals do get hit sometimes and get sent flying out into areas that are off the road. If you're interested in attending the wildlife training, or sorry, the roadkill study training, we will be going into a lot more detail about safety, about protocols, and things like that. In order to do this study, we did get two permits, one from Arizona Department of Transportation, a road encroachment permit from them, and we also got a research permit from Arizona Game and Fish. So, kind of thinking about infrastructure improvements and stuff along Highway 82, we have a lot of opportunities here. Okay. And one of those opportunities is that between the Nature Conservancy and Borderlands Restoration, both organizations' protection teams have done a lot of work in the last couple decades to acquire land through this really critical wildlife corridor on both sides of the highway. If you look, you can take a look at the map to the right and kind of get an idea of some of the land holdings that Borderlands Restoration and the Nature Conservancy have. Ideally, I would love to see projects be implemented in places where we already have long-term protected land already available, and land where it's protected on either side of the highway, so animals can then further move into their core habitats. So we have a lot of opportunities there. However, as I've been saying this whole time, we're doing the study because we want the data to inform the work. So we will follow the data, and if we find that the best locations to do highway infrastructure projects are in places where we don't have land holdings, we do intend to work with landowners and find solutions to be able to implement those projects. So land ownership is a great existing opportunity. The people in this area is a great opportunity. I kind of mentioned the core team that's been working with me on this project already. Excellent, invested, very diverse group of expertise in that group, but also the town of Patagonia, as I kind of mentioned before, this is a very conservation-focused community. As I mentioned, we've already drawn about a dozen volunteers from the community who are interested in participating. But beyond just the people, it's the partners. So I mentioned that we're working RA with Arizona Department of Transportation and Arizona Game and Fish. But we're also still in contact with Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection, Borderlands Restoration. Again, I represent the Nature Conservancy here. Sky Island Alliance has been a great partner. Thanks again to Sky Island Alliance for inviting me to talk here on this coffee break presentation. And then finally, the Wildlands Network. They're a binational conservation organization that has done a lot of roadkill studies, in particular, along Ruta dos, along the northern border of Sonora. So I told you guys, interested in recruiting volunteers. If you're interested in participating in this and trying to improve this really wonderful wildlife corridor that we have through here, I would love to talk to you. So we're actively recruiting. In order to do so, you would sign up as a Nature Conservancy volunteer, and I would help you through that process. Like I mentioned before, we have a training for the roadkill study that will be required for anyone who participates, largely due to safety reasons, but also just so everyone's on the same ship regarding the protocols. If you cannot make May 19th at 1:30 p.m., this training will be recorded, and simply watching it and reaching out to me with questions afterwards would be sufficient. The way that you would get signed up for this is to just reach directly out to me. My email is right there. It's aaron.mrotek@tnc.org. Once you get signed up or reach out to me, I'll get you signed up as one of our Nature Conservancy volunteers. So I can record hours. You're covered under insurances and stuff like that. And then we'll get you set up with the training as well. So again, thank you guys so much for allowing me the time today. Hopefully this has been inspiring and also gets you guys involved in this wildlife corridor that we have through here. But that's the end of my section, and what I'm going to do now is pass it over to my friend and partner, Bryon.
All right, thank you so much, Aaron. Yeah, with a little bit of time we have left, I'm just gonna go over some of our other efforts as an organization in this corridor and talk about other opportunities to help out in improving it. So yeah, first thing I want to talk about is our road rewilding project. I'm sure many of you are aware of it, but this map shows that same corridor we've been looking at with Sonoita up at the top, Patagonia in between the Santa Ritas and the Patagonia Huachuca Mountain Canal Hills block down here. As you may be aware or not, the Sierra Vista Ranger District encompasses these mountain ranges to the south here. It doesn't include the Santa Ritas, but the rest of these ranges are within that district. And this district has one of the highest road densities of any forest district in the nation. In this map, all these red roads are roads that the forest has determined should be decommissioned. They have now been administratively decommissioned, but the vast majority of these roads still have not been physically closed or blocked to traffic. So we have partnered with the forest to try and get that work done. And we started just recently actually physically blocking and closing roads. And on this map, you'll see down in the lower right-hand corner, there are some road segments marked in a darker blue. And those are road segments that we have closed so far. So we've closed 9 roads, which is great. It's almost 2% of the 511 roads that need to be closed on the district. But, you know, that's job security, I suppose. But yeah, we're getting that work going and really excited about this project. There are some other road segments in more of a teal blue that you'll see highlighted here that are other roads that we've got cleared and ready to do closure work on. So keep a lookout on our events page. We'll be going out to close more of these road segments soon, and we're working with the forest to create a pipeline of roads that we can keep closing. So we look forward to doing that and opening up even more of these blocks of habitat and taking the human presence out of there so that wildlife can move more freely across this landscape. Next slide. I just wanted to give you all too just an idea of what our work looks like down there. So in the top left corner here, we've got a road segment that we're getting ready to close. Folks are starting to roughen the surface, but yeah, right down below that in picture C, you can see that right now our protocol is that we go in and we hand roughen the surface of the road using picks and other tools to kind of break up the surface of the road. We do erosion control work along the roadbed if it's necessary to keep the road from becoming like a channel for erosion. We seed the roadbed then with native grass, forb, and perennial seeds to help the revegetation process along the roadbed. We drag a bunch of brush into and around the road to kind of obscure it and to create nice microhabitats for seed to germinate and to make it not look like a nice road to try and drive on. And then we put a fence across the road opening and a sign saying that it is closed. And you can see that kind of finished process in photo B up above. Obviously, this process is going to look different on different roads. We've started with some of the easier roads so that we could get the ball rolling and learn different ways to do this work. But you know, we anticipate that in the future, some of these roads may need more like heavy machinery to create berms, move big rocks, things like that to block access. A lot of it depends on the surrounding ecosystem. And so there are opportunities for this work, the actual physical closures. We also have opportunities for folks to go out and survey road segments that haven't yet been surveyed so that we know what kind of issues we're looking at along those road surveys. So if you have any interest in that work, reach out to me. We've got pages on our website that go into all of this as well. Next slide. All right, so
We got about 2
another
minutes
big
left,
project.
Bryon.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. You know, other big projects we have going on are our photofauna project. Next slide. This is a community science project where folks have their own wildlife cameras and upload checklists every month. You can keep going every month about what wildlife are showing up on their cameras. And we have, this is a screen capture from a dashboard on our website showing like some of the wildlife that have been showing up on cameras across the way. And you can see here, kind of upper leftish when you're looking at all these hexagons, there's a dark blue hexagon right there in the Patagonia area, just showing how important that area is as a wildlife corridor between these areas. And I encourage you to check out these, this project on our website as well. Next slide. We also have our Spring Seeker project ongoing in the area. There are over 100 springs and seeps in the Hermosa Mines Cone of Depression. We're using surveys and the Friends of Sonoita Creek are using these surveys to monitor groundwater impacts of mining activity. And these surveys are also used to identify conservation or restoration needs. Next slide. Throughout the area. And we use these to inform our own work to improve this habitat. This map just shows springs that have been surveyed throughout this larger corridor, showing where there's water, where we're not seeing water, where there's sign from vegetation of springs. So this is another great way to get involved in our work. Spring Seeker is another community science project that informs a lot of the work we do. And next slide. And one of the things that work has informed are projects to improve water access for wildlife within these corridors. So we have been doing projects to install water for cattle to get them away from natural or more natural sources of water like ponds and things like that. We've been fencing around old stock tanks earthen stock tanks with wildlife-friendly fencing to allow wildlife easy access to those waters, but keep cattle out. And then putting in ramps and things like that at stock tanks to allow wildlife access to those as well. So next slide. There are also projects like that upcoming. And again, just keep a lookout on our website. So thank you all for coming. I know some questions have been answered throughout the presentation, and if folks want to stay and ask more questions, they are welcome to stay. If folks need to leave, thank you so much for attending the talk today. And I know myself, and I'm sure Emily and Aaron would be happy to address any other questions that have come up that haven't already been answered. So if you have a question, you can just drop it in the chat, or I don't know, if we want to open up mics for questions, we can do that as well.
Sure. Feel free to unmute. Well, I'll just go ahead and say it's so exciting to see there's so much going on in this really important wildlife corridor. As you can see, there's lots of groups doing lots of activities, and we'll be following up with our supporters and our community about guidance to submit comments for the draft environmental impact statement on the Hermosa mine. So look for information from us in the coming weeks, and there will be a 45-day comment period that starts next week to submit public comments on that.
All right.
Okay. Robert, did you have a question? Or were you waving by?
Sorry, I was muted. I was just waving goodbye. Great presentation, everyone. Very inspiring. Aaron, it was great to see you. I have to get hold of you.
It's great to see you too, Robert. I saw your box pop up. That made me smile.
Until soon, folks.
Yep.
All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. And we'll be sharing the recording later today for this talk in case there's anyone you want to share it with. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.